At the start, I ask for the indulgence of the international delegates here, for the story I'm about to tell concerns primarily the history of the United States. All the same, I think investigations into the history of other nations and regions would reveal similar patterns. There are three ways in which historians have tried to make sense out of the history of the family in America. The oldest of these is the liberal interpretation. It was first offered by Henry Sumner Maine in his mid-19th century book, Ancient Law. His thesis holds that the change in all so-called progressive societies, and he includes the United States in that category, is from status to contract. In pre-modern societies, rulers or legislators only reached to the heads of families. These patriarchal males then governed the women, children, and servants within their domestic domain. The status of each person, male or female, parent or child, free or servant, was fixed by custom and law. Political entities, states, were composed of patriarchal households, not of individuals. However, Maine argues that the sphere of civil law, small at first, tends steadily to enlarge itself. Along the way, ever more personal rights and ever greater amounts of property are removed from exclusive domestic or household control and brought to the attention of public authorities. This movement features the gradual dissolution of family dependency and the growth of individual obligation in its place. The individual is steadily substituted for the family as the unit of which civil laws take account. The family, as such, is left with ever diminished authority and ever fewer enforceable claims, moving toward legal extinction. The second theory of historical interpretation is Marxist. Loosely inspired by the ideas of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the first comprehensive history of the family in America appeared in 1917. Entitled A Social History of the American Family, From Colonial Times to the Present, this three-volume work was authored by Arthur W. Calhoun. He emphasized the economic factor pushing social change. Put another way, he says that the form and texture of family relations depend primarily on the evolution of economic technique, a classic Marxist argument. As an example, Calhoun sees American family life in the early 20th century as shaped by the growth of the larger capitalism. The real basis of then evident family woes and problems, he argues, derived from the pathologies of capitalism. Calhoun, like Maine, saw history of the family moving or evolving in a distinctive direction. In Calhoun's view, society is working toward socialism, which he argued would actually deliver the regeneration of the family. However, he continued, the meaning and spirit of socialism would require a radically new set of family values, including absolute sex equality, the scientific teaching of sex relations, a thoroughgoing eugenics enforced at the outset by law, limitation of the size of the family, and easy divorce when deemed best for all concerned. Since technological innovation in the economy would never end, Calhoun emphasized that the evolution of the family would also never end. And since, in the light of social evolution, nothing is right or moral in itself, he anticipated that there will ultimately be as many types of sex commerce as there are of individual taste. Indeed, Calhoun predicted in 1919 the return of legal polygamy in his new family order. And if he could have imagined it, same-sex marriage would also surely have won his approval. It's all a matter of taste. A third school of historical interpretation has emerged in the early years of the 21st century. It draws on both liberal and Marxist theories while bringing in other philosophical strands. The emotionalism of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the concept of crafting your own personal moral code advanced by Friedrich Nietzsche, and the sexual enthusiasm of Havelock Ellis. Focusing on what they call the love revolution, representative authors are American historians Nancy Cott and Stephanie Kuntz. Their view of historical evolution sees the family moving from an institution focused primarily on the procreation or birth of children and the preservation of family property toward a flexible lifestyle choice involving no prescribed roles. Such choices turn marriage into a personal and private relationship that should fulfill each individual's emotional and sexual desires. This transition has meant the rejection of any particular marriage model, in their view, most particularly the Judeo-Christian one. Similarly, it has rejected all appeals to nature or to a natural family order. Most tellingly, it has denied that the procreation of children is a defining or even important feature of marriage. More specifically, Nancy Cott argues that historical evolution is bringing new understandings to the categories of husband and wife. Instead of being a rigid institution, marriage is evolving into a new one, the final destination of a love match. Freedom and private choices are enhancing rather than damaging marriage and family, they say. This is why she says that the push for same-sex marriage has actually renewed the honor attached to conjugal bonds. Kuntz brings a determinism to this historical argument every bit as strong as that of the liberals or the Marxists. She acknowledges that the marriage revolution, which she has chronicled, has produced considerable strife and turmoil in many private lives, on a scale rivaling the disruptions of the Industrial Revolution. However, she adds, such has been the cost, as thousands of years of tradition came to an end. My forthcoming book, Family Cycles, Strength, Decline, and Renewal in American Domestic Life, 1630 to 2000, presents the case for an alternate, or fourth, and I believe a much better and more accurate historical interpretation of the family in America. Rather than finding change over time in one direction, I identify in this book 4 distinct cycles in this pageant. These cycles show periods of a strengthening or a weakening of American family systems around a single normative model. This distinctly American family model involves early and nearly universal marriage, high fertility, close attention to parental responsibilities, complementary gender roles, flexible but real intergenerational bonds, an aspiration toward family economic autonomy, and relative stability. Notably, such traits distinguish the American family system from the European model, identified since 1700, involving late marriage, a high proportion of the adult population never married, and significantly lower fertility. When the American traits have been clearly dominant, I label the family system under scrutiny as strong. When the opposite behaviors have appeared, foregone or delayed marriages, lower fertility, and other signs of a retreat from childbearing, more divorce, loss of economic liberty, and heightened intergenerational conflict, then I label the system under study as weak. As my inquiry on this matter proceeded, I was surprised to discover that these cycles of strength and weakness occurred until recently in remarkably consistent 50-year swings. Periods of strength can be found, and again, give or take 5 years, from 1630 to 1680, from 1730 to 1780, from 1830 to 1880, and from 1930 to 1970. These episodes of strength were set apart by periods of decline, from 1680 to 1730, from 1780 to 1830, and from 1880 to 1930, with another period of decline beginning about 1970. Viewed another way, I argue that there have been 4 family cycles of strength and decline since 1630, each one of about 100 years' duration. Turns within this cyclical narrative derive from intellectual, economic, cultural, and religious influences with linkages to generational change. Allow me to describe, albeit briefly, one such period of family renewal, that from 1730 to 1780, the decades leading up to and including the American Revolution. Observers of colonial America in the mid-18th century reported startling domestic realities. In 1748, for example, the Swedish Academy of Science sent Professor of Economy Peter Kalm to visit the American middle colonies of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. He found an astonishing social order. As soon as a person is old enough, he reported, he may marry in these provinces without any fear of poverty. Good and uncultivated land is so abundant that a newly married man can, without difficulty, get a spot of ground where he may sufficiently subsist with wife and children. He continued, taxes are so low and the liberties he enjoys are so great that he considers himself as a prince in his possessions. Even more remarkable were the swarms of children that he saw. In Chester, Pennsylvania, he visited Richard Buttington, who had gathered 115 living descendants in his home. In Trenton, New Jersey, meanwhile, the widow Sarah Furman died during Kalm's visit. She was age 87, leaving behind 5 children, 61 grandchildren, 182 great-grandchildren, and 12 great-great-grandchildren, 260 living descendants in all. In this manner, he concluded, the usual wish or blessing in our Swedish Lutheran liturgy that the new married couple may see their grandchildren till the 3rd and 4th generation has been literally fulfilled in North America. In his 1754 report to the Duke of Württemberg on German settlers in Pennsylvania, Gottlieb Mittelberger describes similar wonders. Regarding size of population, it must be confessed that the female sex in this new country is very fruitful. In both city and country, when one comes into a house, one finds it usually full of children, and the city of Philadelphia is fairly swarming with them. Mittelberger added that whenever a visitor meets an American woman, she is either with child, or she carries a child in her arms, or leads one by the hand. Still more curiously, a baby boom also seemed to be occurring among African American slaves. In the British colonies of Barbados and Jamaica, by contrast, the death rate among slaves was near calamitous. Relatively few native-born babies appeared, still fewer survived into adulthood. Only the arrival of new imports from Africa sustained these slave-based economies in the 18th century. In Virginia, however, clergyman Hugh Jones reported as early as 1724 that the number of slaves increased not only, quote, by fresh supplies from Africa and the West Indies, but also because the Negroes are very prolific among themselves. 35 years later, the English visitor Andrew Burnaby reported that the number of African Americans in the southern colonies was, quote, nearly equal, if not superior, to that of whites, while they propagate and increase faster. The American polymath and founder, Benjamin Franklin, pondered the significance and causes of such developments. In his remarkable 1755 essay, observations concerning the increase of mankind, peopling of countries, etc., he concluded that American marriage and birth rates were twice as high as those of Europe, with an average of 8 births per American marriage compared to 4 in the old countries. He also calculated that our people must at least be doubled every 20 years, based on native births alone. Why the difference? Franklin argued that people increase in proportion to the number of marriages, and that where and when families can be easily supported, more persons marry, and earlier. In addition, Franklin argued that religious groups, which regarded frugality and hard work as religious duties, and which educated their children therein, would consequently increase more by natural generation than groups that did not. And it seems clear that he had in mind here the Quakers of the Delaware Valley. Writing in 1775, Harvard University theologian Edward Wigglesworth hinted at developments and prospects divine. Through births alone, British Americans had doubled their numbers every 25 years since the founding of the first settlement. Quote, "A rapidity of population not to be paralleled in the annals of Europe. Indeed, such a thing has never been equaled since the patriarchal ages," unquote. Why? Wigglesworth argued that Americans are less luxurious in their manner of living, that they marry earlier in life, which results in more children, that their temperance in diet renders them more healthy, and that boundless tracts of new land open prospects for obtaining freehold farms, which enabled every new married couple and their children to gain by their industry a comfortable support. Also looking ahead, he estimated that Americans will be more numerous than their brethren in Great Britain in a mere 50 years. Indeed, something very remarkable was happening in mid-18th century America. As I interpret the historical records and statistics, it seems clear that the middle decades of the 18th century were witness to a new cycle in American family life. Another episode characterized by a culture of marriage, a low age at first marriage, an average of 20 for women, 22 for men, family stability, gender complementarity, supplemented by an enhanced status for women, which astonished European observers, tender child-rearing, and relative social harmony. However, unlike the prior cycle of strength found among the Puritans in New England alone during the 17th century, this new turn involved 5 distinct family systems, all showing a common pattern. Found among white planters on the Chesapeake Bay, among African American slaves also on the Chesapeake, among Quakers in the Delaware Valley, with a strong echo among German settlers in southeastern Pennsylvania, among religiously awakened New Englanders, and among the Scotch-Irish on the American borderlands, the hill country of Appalachia. Despite the considerable and indeed sometimes enormous differences that existed between these groups, they exhibited in each case most, or indeed all, of the traits of family strength which I outlined earlier during the fateful years 1730 to 1780. In effect, these 5 systems were moving towards one distinct American pattern, the prototype of the natural family in America. And it was this confidence in their social and family lives which, I believe, gave courage and confidence to the American colonists to challenge the greatest empire on earth, the British Empire, over questions of economics and governance in the fateful year of 1776. My last paragraph. Why might this be important to us now? Well, if my analysis is correct, we are now 45 years into a cycle of decline. Hence, it is also possible that we are on the cusp of a new period of family renewal in the decades ahead. This may be true for the very reasons that inspired earlier periods of family strength, that after 2 generations living under social turmoil and period of decline, there emerged a yearning by the next generation to turn towards home, which in turn seems to produce new young leaders, religious, cultural, and political, who might show the way. Stepping out of my role as historian, dare I add, may it be so.